Well, let's take you to this now. United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov have met in the Saudi Arabia capital Riyadh. This for the most important talks to date between the two major powers in ending the war in Ukraine. Now, this also marks a major shift from the previous U.S. administration, which sought to isolate Russia for invading Ukraine. South Africa says it's still maintaining a non-aligned position to the conflict. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov is expected to attend the G20 Foreign Affairs Ministers meeting on Thursday and Friday in Johannesburg. Now, let's look at the latest on the Russia-Ukraine talks and U.S.-Europe relations. To unpack this, we're now joined by Professor David Monyae, Associate Professor of Political Science and International Relations at the University of Johannesburg. Prof, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for your time. So our understanding here in terms of these talks is that the talks by the foreign ministers are meant to pave the way for U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Putin to engage face-to-face at some point. But can the U.S. really be conducting these so-called peace talks with Russia without Ukraine's presence? What is your thinking?
I think, firstly, President Trump's initiative, speaking to President Putin as well as President Zelensky of Ukraine, and linking up with quite a number of strategic allies of the United States, is one of the greatest moves since 4 years of Biden. It signals a United States that wants to resolve the Russia-Ukraine crisis. However, it is important to have Ukrainians' endorsement of whatever that's being discussed in Saudi Arabia. I hope this is just testing the waters, ensure that President Putin is serious, as they put it, about the negotiations.
And they can do that without Ukraine? I mean, how feasible is that going to be?
But let's face it, when everything is said and done, this war relies heavily on the United States in terms of providing not just the moral, financial, as well as the logistical. Without the United States, I do not think that Europe on its own with Ukraine will be able to extend the war much any longer, more than 3-4 months. And therefore, I think if the United States clears certain issues with Russia, for instance, the concern on Russia's part about the expansion of NATO, if that can be cleared, I think they can then move to other issues, whether Ukraine should join NATO or not, and the logistics of peacekeeping, what is Russia willing to give in as much as Ukraine itself. But the bottom line is that all what is happening is good. Anyone who talks about peace, it's something that should be welcomed by the international community.
Let's now unpack the European and U.S. relations. Some EU leaders believe that Trump has upended the quote-unquote trustful relationship between the United States and Europe. What message do you think these meetings are sending to Europe?
It's a very clear message that the traditional reliance of Europe on the United States to carry the heavy burden on security matters is coming to an end. They are required to contribute significant amounts for their own security. I think that message has been really signaled by the Defense Secretary, the Secretary of State, as well as President Trump himself. But beyond that, I think what President Trump is doing is to reset the entire geopolitics, understanding the big power politics that for him, renegotiating with President Putin on a host of issues is central to open up in other. So therefore, there might be give in on Syria, on all other areas, hotspots in the world. So it's like going back during the Cold War, where then the Soviet Union and the United States used to do this kind of negotiation.
And just talking about resetting the entire geopolitical landscape, and in light, of course, of the global trade wars that we are seeing, of course, emanating during Trump's term, what is South Africa's position then in all of this? Just watching these developments, we know, of course, that that the Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, is meeting with then Marco Rubio from the United States, who said that he will not be coming to South Africa. Sergei Lavrov is, of course, coming to the G20 Foreign Ministers Summit that starts tomorrow. Just South Africa's position here, just monitoring these developments. Of course, South Africa has always held that non-aligned position with the Ukraine-Russia war.
I think for South African government, its position is quite clear that you have articulated: non-interference and non-aligned in a manner that it is anti-war, it is pro-peaceful resolution to the conflict. When it comes to the governing party, or the major governing party within the GNU, the ANC in particular, shares quite a number of issues with what President Trump is trying to do. Going back to the original reason for tension between Moscow and Washington. I think that is to do with the encroachment of NATO into the borders of Russia. It's a position that ANC has advanced, and I think President Trump, one way or another, seemed to respect that position, which was rejected by President Biden as well as the entire Western world. And therefore, I think going forward, I think you might see realignments. It's good. The initial moves made. However, I think what is worrying for South Africa's government and the AU is President Trump's anti-multilateralism, a central pillar of South Africa's foreign policy. And going forward, I think we are going for 4 hard years having President Trump that anti-multilateralism, particularly United Nations Security Council, that South Africa wants to see reformed.